I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator for this evening, Susan Spratt. Please give Susan a warm welcome.
Isn't democracy wonderful? It's so great to see so many people out in Ladner today for this very important debate. I would like to just add that I was a founding member of the Council of Canadians back in 1988 and was on the board for 15 years nationally. And I urge you, if you haven't signed up to be put on the Council of Canadians email list, that you do so. We have lots of really good information for folks, especially as it pertains to where we live. So we have done a draw for the speakers and for our wonderful candidates that are seeking the election in South Delta. And so the results are as follows: Bruce Reid, and then Larry Colero, and then Nicholas Wong. And we will then rotate the questions so that everybody doesn't always start first, and it's more equitable and fair. So first of all, I'd like to introduce all three candidates to you, and then Bruce will start, and we'll go from there. I'm getting hand signs here. This is our timekeeper. The candidates know how much time they have to speak, and he will let you know when you're at the halfway point, and when you see the red, please wind up, or I will have to be mean. I didn't bring my hook because I knew you'd all behave yourselves. So I'm going to introduce all the candidates, and then I'm going to go back and ask them to start with their opening comments. So Bruce Reid is representing the New Democratic Party. Bruce is a teacher, a counselor, a Delta school trustee. Bruce has been a volunteer with the Salvation Army as a pastor and an administrator and an executive member of the Richmond Teachers Association, BCTF. He is a father of 3 and a grandfather of 5. Bruce is concerned about the future facing all BC residents. Welcome, Bruce. Larry Colero is representing the Green Party tonight. Larry taught corporate ethics at both UBC's Sanders School of Business and SFU's Beatty School of Business. He is currently on retainer as a policy advisor to the Institute of Advanced Financial Planners. A former president of Ladner Minor Baseball and chair of the Delta Community Living Society, he was a South Delta resident for 25 years before moving to White Rock, learned his lesson, and now he's back in South Delta. And last but not least is Nicholas Wong, who is running as an independent. Nicholas was born and raised in South Delta. The Wong family owned and operated Mr. Mike's Steakhouse in Ladner Village through the 80s and wished it was still open. He graduated from Simon Fraser University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy. He has been active in environmental initiatives, and in 2014 he ran for Delta Council as part of an independent slate. Welcome to you all. So, Bruce, if you wouldn't mind starting, and you can watch the timekeeper, and he'll wave at you.
Thank you, and I'm not live. I can go without the mic.
Oh.
I have no problem.
I think you should use the mic.
Okay. Don't take that as my time.
I'll start again.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody here today. I've only got a minute, so I'm going to speak very quickly. Hopefully I don't hurt your ears. I'm here today because we need a change in this province. Christy Clark says she's proud of the record of the Liberals. I guess she's proud of the fact that our environment is constantly being destroyed by many of her policies. I guess she's proud of the fact that many seniors are scrimping and scraping to get along. She's proud of the fact we have the highest child poverty rate in Canada. Proud of the fact that housing crises are making it so that young people can't find a house to buy and even a house to rent. She's proud about the mental health and the health care and the decreasing incomes that everybody's facing. We need to have a new government in this province. We need to replace the Liberals. And that can only be done successfully by having an NDP government. And I'm here today to talk about that and hopefully to get more support for people who understand what the issues are and the ways that we can replace the current government and see some prosperity coming back for everybody in BC, not just Christy Clark's rich friends.
Hi, I am Larry No Signs Colero, and you'll notice no signs out there. It's purposeful. I have been, as was mentioned, a resident of Ladner for some time. In 1983, my wife and I had a couple of very small kids, and we were looking for a place to live and could not afford one in Richmond, where we were. And just like the younger generations now, the next generation down, we had to move away from where we were to find a place that was affordable. And our kids are now moving farther and farther away from the Lower Mainland. That, I guess it's a whole other issue I'll talk about later. But I'm very pleased to be here. I so much respect the work of the Council of Canadians and have supported them financially and so on. I had the great fortune to meet Mel Hertig at one point and have a little chat with him. And I just have so much admiration for Maud Barlow and the work that they've done around the world. Thank you.
Oh, hi everybody. I'm glad to see everybody out here tonight. First, I'd like to thank the moderator, Susan Spratt, the Council of Canadians, and the Delta Residents Association for putting this together. Now, my name is Nicholas Wong, and I am your independent candidate here in Delta South. As you've heard, I was born and raised here. I played football and baseball in the fields all around. And I have such a great love for this community, its environment, and the quality of life that creates a community of people who still get together, who still talk to each other when they walk down the street. And whatever I can do to preserve that is something that I want to make sure gets into policy in Victoria. I'm honored to be endorsed by our incumbent independent MLA, Vicky Huntington, in the crowd tonight here. And she definitely deserves that. And what I want to do is build on her legacy of good, honest representation in an independent fashion. Because quite frankly, a good idea for South Delta is a good idea no matter where it comes from. I look forward to the questions tonight, and thank you all for coming out.
So I would be remiss if I didn't mention, since we have media here, that there are two absent runners for this provincial election. One is Ian Patton from the Liberal Party, who sent his regrets and couldn't come today. And the other is Errol Shirley, who is with the BC Action Party. And he also is not attending this evening. So I just wanted to put that on the record so people didn't think that everyone wasn't invited. Everyone was. And this is why it gets more exciting now that we move into the questions. So, the first question. Last Friday, the Optimist reported that the number of special education assistants will be slashed in the Delta School District due to a $2 million shortfall in the budget. What will you do about this if elected? Yeah.
That's why I ran, because of the cuts that I saw in education. I ran for school board trustee, and I made a promise as a school board trustee that I would make education an issue during this campaign. The cuts that are coming up, first of all, I have to say that the school board people that I work with, and we don't all come from the same backgrounds, have done a really good job and are doing a good job, and as have the predecessors, in working with the little bit of money that the Liberal government gives to the school boards and the money that's progressively cut. This is just a shame, and I can tell you later on that there's so many stories of where these cuts have hurt students, and that's why I ran. With regard to the cuts coming up, the reasons for the cuts are explained, and Probably very, very well justified, and the only problem is that I will tell you right now that even though they tend to be financially justified, I will vote against those cuts. And that's not letting any confidence out, because you already know the things, and I'll be voting next week, and I'll be voting against the cuts. But I think you need to understand that we have to stand up. We have to take a stand, and we have to vote against things like that. But many stories I could tell you in education, and we need a strong voice to restore the billions of dollars that have been cut from education over the past few years. With regard to what's coming up with the immediate budget, I'm hoping that we'll see more money go into education when the new democratic government forms, and we'll be able to see restoration to a lot of services. But specifically with regard to the cuts that are coming up, this is something that is something that I would fight to see increases. I will speak a few seconds just on the thing with regard to EAs. Such a need to have EAs in the school anymore. Wonderful people who work selflessly with the teachers and the students to help, and I think it's a shame that we don't have, instead of letting 28 go, that we aren't hiring another 28. But that's just the situation that the Liberals have cut. And don't be mad at the trustees. They only have so much money, and that's all they can do.
Of course, I'm not directly involved like Bruce is, but my understanding of the situation is that the school district had their reasons for doing what they did. And so what I will do, if elected, is not interfere with other levels of government. You want to work with those levels, but you also want to trust that they are also doing the best they can. And so I don't think it's up to the province to tell the Delta School District what to do. Of course, we would set overall guidelines, and I'll get to that in a moment. What I definitely would not do is break the law and withhold $330 million from education, and I would not make teachers make them overwork, and rob a whole generation of children of a good education, like we have done, like the Liberal government has done. Our daughter Julie was a high school teacher for quite some years, and now she's teaching elementary here in South Delta. And she gave us some interesting stories during that time, and I could see the kind of bind that teachers were in. And so there definitely is a need for some changes and some innovations. And one of the things that the Greens would do is increase funding for schools immediately by $220 million, and eventually $1.5 billion by 2021. Because the Green Party believes that there is no better investment than education, and it has it pays off in the long-term success of those kids when they're adults. It pays off in terms of their ability to look after themselves and to live healthy lives. So we would invest heavily in early childhood education as well, $500 million now, and basically, how would we fund all this stuff? Well, we wouldn't build the Site C down.
Thank you very much to my colleagues. I think there are going to be a lot of things tonight that you'll find that we all agree on, because education, healthcare, the environment, these are things that we cannot compromise, and it's things that need to be fought on no matter who the representative is. The question was, what will you do about the underfunded school budgets that are resulting in cuts to special education assistance? And the only answer that there can be is everything that I can. Everything that I physically can do to make sure that our school system is properly funded must be done. Because this is an investment in our future. Our kids, this is the working stock that are going to be paying for everything else in this province for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And that's why education is of such vital importance. I believe it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt who said that education is the last expenditure that we should economize. And that right there is a statement about values. It's about valuing education, and it's not about specific numbers on how much money to spend. And you'll notice that the BC Liberals put in $50 million for special education at the beginning of this year. And despite that, we are still $2 million short from providing assistance to those people in our school system who need it the most. Now, I know how effective an EA can be for providing an increase in the efficiency and the effectiveness of our teachers, because my mother is one, a high school teacher in Surrey, and I am lucky to have a number of my own high school teachers in my supporters group and in my volunteers. So again, I think that we can all agree that education is something that cannot be squandered, that cannot be underfunded, and no matter which one of us gets in, and especially myself, will fight to make sure that we have a properly funded public education system. Thank you very much.
Okay, our next question. The Liberal government suggested in the last year of having a casino in Delta, and the Delta Council expressed an interest. Would you support the building of a destination casino and hotel in South Delta? And we will start with Larry.
I'm not opposed to the concept of casinos entirely, but I am definitely opposed to having one on Tsawwassen First Nations land, right next door to all the residences there in Tsawwassen, where we now live. The casino is putting a casino into a highly populated area is a huge gamble. And but in this case, the gamble is a little bit different because you've got different winners and different losers. So the losers are obviously the adverse effects that are going to be absorbed by the community and public resources. And yet we have not done a proper consultation of the community to ask if they are willing to take on additional crime and traffic and competition for local businesses like bars and restaurants. The win, of course, is for the casino owners, the private owners of the casino, for the BC Lotteries Corporation, and for Delta Municipal Council, which I believe is why they supported it. And so, you know, my two dearest aunts love to go to the slots, okay? I'm not opposed to the whole concept, but you have to put it someplace where it makes sense. And the proposal that it go in the Town and Country Inn makes a lot more sense. I'm not sure that's the best place either, but we certainly don't want to put it where Bass Pro is currently. And the other thing about gambling in general is I object to the BC Lottery Corporation promoting a potentially addictive activity that is harmful in many cases to families as well as to individuals. And if we're going to offer casinos, that's fine, but let's not advertise it to make it look sexy and appealing to people. So yes, we can offer it, but let's not encourage it. Thank you.
So, in my opinion, casinos are quite a mixed bag of pros and cons. Now, I know that several members of my family would be happy to see a casino come in nice and close. It saves them a trip down to Vancouver or down south of the border. But there are a number of concerns about having one so near to our homes that have not been sufficiently addressed. So I made a little pros and cons list. So on the pros side, what we would be attracting to our community is a lot of money as well as general interest. And that's something that is never a bad thing for our local economies or our small businesses. It also has a higher chance of infrastructure upgrades, particularly regarding rapid transit. Now, this also has a possibility that I don't think anyone's really considering here, that if we design it right, what we could have for our community is something that promotes our incredibly underutilized ecotourism industry. We could show the world what an amazing place our community is and highlight and increase the preservation of that through this casino. Now, I'm not saying that's what they're going to do. I'm saying it's a possibility. But there's a con side, too. It attracts crime and impaired driving, much like my colleague said. It's also another major alteration when we have not even seen what the impacts of the other major alterations they're making to our community are going to be. It could also result in the loss of farmland and in our environment. and we certainly do not want it right in the hearts of our communities. So I'm neither for nor against this proposal. There are ways that we can use it to enhance South Delta and utilize new markets and new revenue opportunities. But ultimately, I think this is something that we as a community have to have an ongoing discussion about. And my job as your next independent MLA is to make sure that you have the information to make an informed decision and to take the results of that decision to Victoria so that your voice is heard, unfiltered by party platform. Thank you very much.
Nice segue to your strive for independence at that point as well, at the end, filling it over. This is a really hard one. As a counselor, I work with a lot of people who deal with all kinds of addictions. And I think the first thing we have to realize that while many people can use gambling in a way that's not harmful to them, that there are many others that misuse gambling and it becomes an addiction that becomes a huge social problem. That doesn't mean that because people have a problem that other people cannot still enjoy the benefits of certain recreational activities, which a casino implies. So it's a difficult one, but I think the points that are made by my two colleagues here are very important for us to understand. First of all, if the casino is going to go forward, it needs to go forward with a lot of community consultation. Secondly, it needs to be done in a place that's not going to be near schools, near children, or near housing areas, so that it's out to its own. So in that way, I think the council has done a bit of homework, and the location at the Town and Country is a non-residential area, so that makes more sense. I suppose it also makes more sense from a getting there perspective, because it's an easy place to get to. So I think these are the issues. I have really mixed feelings about those things. The whole concept of gambling, as I say, can be very, very difficult. But on the other hand, it's a reality of our society. And I mean, I haven't gone to the casino down at River Rock, but I've been tempted to go just to see their entertainers, because they bring in a lot of good entertainers. And it just sounds like, hey, that's a great place to have it. So there are some things that are positive there. But I'll be very honest with you. I don't have a good answer. I would want to think about it long and hard, as we all should, before we say okay to bringing something into our community that has a potential for good, but also a potential for harm as well.
Speaking of the Town and Country, we move to our next question, because if the interchange is built, it might be difficult. So the next question is, plans are moving forward to replace the George Massey Tunnel with a 10-lane tolled bridge. This is just one component of a plan to expand highways and interchanges on both sides of the south arm of the Fraser River. Do you support the tunnel replacement project? Do you support this larger transportation vision? And if not, what are your alternatives for moving people and goods in the region?
Thank you very much for the question. The issue of the George Massey Tunnel replacement project is one that's very near and dear to my heart. I've been involved in it since 2013, when they first started inkling about the project and didn't really release enough information. So, does a solution need to happen for the Highway 99 corridor through the George Massey Tunnel? Absolutely. Everyone can agree on that, because traffic is terrible and it's one of the worst bottlenecks in the country. But do we have enough information to say that Christy Clark's proposed bridge is the best solution for this community? And I have to say, we resoundingly do not. In fact, I wrote an 18-page research paper back when I was 23 on exactly why we can't make that decision. And I have an entire stack of documents taken right from the project website that, as you can see, are entirely CIA-style redacted. We don't have the information to make that statement, that it is the best for our community. So no, I can't be in favor of this project as it currently stands. But I think that we should wait for the Auditor General's report on that and to see whether or not it stands up to legitimate scrutiny. But in the meantime, I've been talking with the United Trucking Association about alternatives to congestion that could be handled right now. And I approached them with the idea about getting trucks off the road for an hour before rush hour in the morning and an hour before rush hour in the evening. And that could reduce congestion by 25 to 50%. That's one phone call and one piece of paper could make that change, and it's an option that the BC Liberals are not looking at. So I do not think that we can build our way out of congestion. I do not think that more roads will lead to a better transportation system. I think we need to look at alternatives such as LRT, increased transit, and a unified tolling strategy across the entire Lower Mainland that does not see people rushing to the Alex Fraser Bridge as opposed to the George Massey Bridge or the Port Mann Bridge. Thank you all very much.
This is a very emotional issue. I drive that tunnel every day as I go into my school in Richmond. I emotionally am very, very concerned about the thoughts of building a bridge. The biggest reason why I feel that is I'm just so afraid that such a huge infrastructure is going to have on the whole estuary and the river and even the bird sanctuary when you build something that big. And I know that the Liberals say it's okay, but I'm really afraid that they might be wrong, that they probably are wrong, and we really need to defend and maintain what we have here, especially in terms of our environment. And our environment is just going like crazy. And I will tell you, if the Liberals get elected, that bridge will go ahead. You can be assured if the Liberals get elected, that bridge will be built and we won't be able to do anything about it. And maybe if you elect an NDP government in the next election, they can tear it down. I mean, they won't, right? But, you know, I mean, it's going to go ahead. Alternatives. We know that building a tunnel that would be equivalent to the bridge would cost about $500 million. That's about 1/7 the cost of building the bridge. We know that when the cars come across the bridge, then they're going to bottleneck up the highway at Oak Street and at Knight Street Bridge. It's just crazy. And I love the suggestion that you have. I was going to say it myself, but you took it before me. But anyway, get the trucks off the road. This morning, and now that I've been thinking about this, I watch as I drive in. And those darn trucks, they're like everywhere. And you're trying to merge, and not only for the sake of making it better, but for the safety. Like, you know, those guys are... No, I won't say that. But anyway, like, you know, sometimes some of those truck drivers can be a little bit hard on the rest of the drivers. So if you get... That's a great solution, and I think we need to do those things. I firmly believe that we shouldn't have tolls all across the mainland. I think having a transit system, this is the last piece, I know I'm going to get stopped in a minute. We need a transit system. We need to have a rapid transit system that will work to get people moving back and forth, and that will also take the pressure off. Thank you.
Okay, the mega bridge is a terrible idea, probably, but we don't know because no proper assessment of alternatives has ever been done. And until we can step back and look at the whole picture, we're never going to be able to justify the bridge or justify not building the bridge. But we fully suspect that once that objective assessment is done, the bridge still will not be a good idea at all. Because what it reflects is, I think as you put it, a larger transportation vision that is based on cars, right? It's a dystopian future where you have more and more cars on the road, fewer people taking transit, because if we blow all of our money on the bridge, there's no money left to pay for public transit. And what we need to do is get people out of their cars and make transit convenient and frequent and clean. I mean, you can't even put your stuff above the railing there on transit. It's so filthy. So there's so many examples of cities around the world that really have got their transit network together, and they make it easy for people. And if we can do that, I mean, the people that say that I have to drive into town, well, you don't really. I mean, you can take the bus into town, and then you can use some kind of ride-sharing program or rent one of those Evo electric cars or something. So I don't buy that argument at all. And so, what we need to do is go back to the transportation master plan that we've had since the 1970s. I mean, yes, it needs updating, but it's the same basic concept, right? Make communities self-sustaining and get people out of their cars. We've known that for a long time, and that's why all the other mayors except Lois Jackson are not in favor of this bridge, including Richmond. I mean, they should be taking that more seriously. I was going to talk about tolls, but I think what I'll do instead is say that we were told that the tunnel is good for another 50 years by Kevin Falcon a few years back. So I don't understand what the hurry is now, other than to get those explosive, highly explosive LNG tankers down the river, and I don't want to see that happening. So the Green Party, you can count on to stop this disaster in the making.
Next question. The Port of Vancouver is proposing to double its container berth capacity with the building of Terminal 2. What is your position on this proposal? And we start with...
There you go, a windmill that goes on water. Anyway, with regard to the Terminal 2, one thing that many people don't realize is that Terminal 2 is designed to be run basically on robotics or mechanization, so that while people would think, oh, well, Terminal 2 is going to give us a lot more employment, the employment that comes from the mechanized port would give very little extra employment while putting, again, our estuary and our environment at risk. So basically, I think that, again, a lot of studies have to be done, but I'm very concerned about the whole concept, because it's a really good idea from a business perspective to put in a terminal that runs on total mechanization. And if it really works well, you can even close down the terminal that has a lot of employees and save a lot of money. That's a good business plan. It's not a good people plan. Now, we don't want to be totally against the ports, because we do consume a lot of goods that come in from all over the world. And we need to have our ports, and our ports are important to us. But they have to be done in such a way, I'm not prepared to see the commodities and the things that are leaving and coming into Vancouver and into our area at the expense of us losing our environment here. And that's what we have to deal with. We have to make sure that everything that's done is done to protect and preserve what we have. And if you look at anybody who's been around here for a while, you look at all the things that have sort of been downgraded and in the environment that we've lost in the past 50 years, it's a very different place than it is now. What's it going to be like 50 years from now if we don't say no and stop things that are going to be... There must be a way of doing it without putting our environment at risk.
Well, I'm sure that most of you here know that Terminal 2 is in a very sensitive ecological area and could do irreplaceable damage, affecting bird life and marine life, and really it's kind of an insane project from that perspective. And it also compromises our food security if it continues to industrialize more farmland and so on. There's so many reasons against it. But I have to question why the Port of Metro Vancouver Board of Directors is trying to make some case for it when then there appears to be no business case, according to a number of people, probably in the audience here. And I kind of see them like a mad scientist, like they're going to build this monster and they don't really care what damage it could do. It's so important to them to continue to expand. It's really irrational. But it makes sense because of the incentives that they're provided. They're a federally authorized body that is rewarded for continuing to expand. Okay? And I think that's one thing behind it, but it's not the whole reason that they're so obsessed with this continual expansion. I think the other reason has to do with the kind of diluted fundamentalist thinking that constantly growing GDP is good for us. Right? And obviously there's not a lot of jobs coming from this. So I think the rationale is around trade. and increasing the GDP, and that kind of thinking that voters have been duped into believing will have some benefit to them from the old trickle-down effect. Who came up with that? Reagan? It's ancient, and it's still hanging on. It's still, in fact, probably stronger than ever. And this is what the Liberals, of course, are trying to get you to believe. So we need to stop looking at the GDP as some kind of measure of quality of life and start putting in some genuine progress indicators and things like that that really are meaningful. Thank you.
This is one of those environmental issues that I have been looking at since I was 18 years old. Now, let me begin by saying that I am not against necessary expansion or growth in our capacity to act as the Pacific Gateway for Canada. If it's necessary, if it's good for the communities, if it's good for our national economy, there are valid reasons to support port expansion. This is not one of those times. I can say that wholeheartedly, that Terminal 2 expansion at Roberts Bank is a wholesale, terrible idea. Pound for pound, it is going to be the most expensive per unit port expansion in the history of mankind. It also flies in the face of cheaper and better alternatives, such as incremental increases to the Global Container Terminal's Delta port or at other ports throughout Vancouver, or looking at Prince Rupert as a possible route for expansion. Instead, what they want to do is double the size of a man-made island in one of, as my colleague pointed out, the most valuable places ecologically that we could possibly have and hold on to. Now, as one of the environmentalists in the room, Susan Jones over there, pointed out once to me when I was much younger, the biofilm, the sensitive biofilm that surrounds Brunswick Point and Roberts Bank is highly put at risk. Now, if that goes away, we could see cataclysmic results in the migratory bird population along the Pacific Flyway. It would decimate the population of western sandpipers that call South Delta one of their stops on their migratory path. And that alone is more than enough reason that this project should not go forward. It doesn't have jobs, it has no economic argument, it has no environmental argument, and it is a terrible project that should not be allowed to go forward. Anything we can do as a province to stop it should be done. Thank you very much.
The next question is also kind of tied into the last question, but goes a little further. The Fraser Delta is an internationally recognized migratory bird stopover under the RAMSAR Convention. In addition to the proposed bridge and Terminal 2, there are more industrial developments underway or proposed for the lower Fraser River, including jet fuel, coal, LNG terminals, among others. In your opinion, are these projects compatible with protecting the biodiversity and natural environment of the region?
No. We are going in entirely the wrong direction, and we need to do a U-turn. Okay, we have to stop, again, assuming that this kind of industrial development is somehow benefiting us here. It might, but in most cases it is not. And again, we have not really looked at the impacts that these projects are having. They may be profitable for a few people, but what are the impacts on the environment? What are the impacts on our quality of life? And what are the impacts on our human safety? When it comes to those LNG tankers, the jet fuel and so on, they are shipping the LNG down through an area. I don't know if you've been to, what is it? What's that site? Tankers, Tanker Safety or something. Anyway, it's part of realhearings.org. And so they're shipping it down through this narrow channel with highly populated areas on either side of the river, which is absolutely a no-no that other regions have refused to do. And what's happening is our government, instead of protecting us, has given the fox control of the hen house, and they've abdicated their responsibility for doing proper environmental assessments by transferring the responsibility to the project proponents. For example, the port itself is doing the assessment on T2, which makes absolutely no sense for the reasons I already told you about the incentives and so on. But the thing is that no one, as far as I know, has ever done a proper cumulative assessment of all the various projects going on in this region. So I'm very glad for this question, because it talks about a number of things. Nature doesn't care that this project passed the assessment or that project passed the assessment. It looks at the whole picture. And disasters are often combinations of events. So we have to step back, look at the whole picture, cumulative effects, and do something about that, and just say no. Thank you.
So I'm very grateful for this question as well. The environment of our amazing community is something that has been in my heart ever since I got involved in politics. And my colleague is absolutely right. What we need are cumulative reviews of the projects in this area, rather than chopping up our community and evaluating it piecemeal. There are great ideas from the Green Party, and great ideas from the NDP, and even some good ideas from the BC Liberals, such as banning US thermal coal. They didn't say that.
I hope we can talk about that.
But wherever the idea comes from, a good idea is a good idea for the community. And as an independent, and only as an independent, can you recognize the value of an idea no matter what the source of it is. Now, these projects are not at all compatible with the value of our environmental wonders that we have here in South Delta. And it is our responsibility to act as vigilant stewards for what we have inherited, to make sure that it is available for future generations to enjoy. To give my kids and my kids' kids the opportunity to grow up with the same reasons to love this community that I did. Now, what I see them doing is cutting off our traditional north-south corridor with $5 to $7 tolls on the George Massey Tunnel replacement project. I see them splintering our farmland with this snaking South Fraser Perimeter Road. I see them cutting off our estuary from the vital biofilm that it needs to survive and sustain life by using the T2 terminal expansion. I see them trying to ship dirty coal out of our community, trying to ship oil and jet fuel out of our river. And it's time that somebody says, no, we need to stand up for our community, for what we have, and make sure that we hold on to it for the next generation and the generation after that. Thank you very much.
By the way, I'm not clapping for my colleagues, it's just I'm passing the mic back and forth, and so I don't get a chance to clap for them as I'm passing the mic. I'm not being rude, honest. I want to clap for both of them. So, with regard to the development, growth is necessary. The opposite of growth is death, but rapid growth or uncontrolled growth is cancer. So basically, I'm talking, of course, in the human body, but growth is necessary, but growth without plan, growth without being regulated, growth without proper nutrition, again, speaking with the body metaphor, just causes chaos. So we need to have growth, but it needs to be regulated. It needs to have consultation from all the stakeholders, including the people that have a direct interest in terms of being nearby, farmers and all the property people. They all need to have input into those things. And then when we have growth, it needs to be in a way that, number one, and I think we all agree here, that the environment is protected. And I'm not prepared to see one more piece of land go to industrial land if it can be prevented. We need to preserve it. We have so little land, and of course, as you know, with the Agricultural Land Reserve, which was an NDP motion that was brought in, the Liberals just simply add some land to the reserve up north that isn't really farmable, and then take good farmland down south and replace it and take that for industrial development. That's a shame. It's a crime, really. But when your rich friends are making money, hey, It's a good thing, right? So that's basically why we need to have the growth, but it has to be controlled, it has to be planned, and it has to be done in a way that protects the environment, because that's got to be our number one goal.
You enjoyed it so much.
Okay. And it looks like, because you're all doing so well, that we'll be able to have additional questions. And I thank everybody for submitting them, and we'll try and get through as many as we can this evening, because this is an important election. So the next question is this. The two urban areas of South Delta were developed mostly as single-family neighborhoods surrounded by natural habitats and agricultural land reserve, farmland. How do you see Ladner and Tsawwassen accommodating growing and changing populations in the future?
All right. Well, this is a fantastic question. It's a little bit of a municipal issue, but it speaks to an overall philosophy on how we see our community growing into the future. Now, we all know that growth is happening, and we all know that the single-family home is not the only option, nor is it the best option for a lot of people, especially with housing prices the way they are today. And I've noticed that people in my generation and people who are aging out of single-family homes need the exact same thing. Housing options, which means smaller units or rental availability. And the only way to do that is to work on increasing density in particular areas. Now, one thing I do not want to see is us compromising our farmland or our green space to accommodate this growth. So, and it was my position when I ran for Delta Council that we look at redeveloping pre-existing corridors for low-rise housing units that will be able to accommodate the smaller units that people aging out of single-family homes and people like myself who are looking at just getting into the job market can buy into. Now, if we do this, what we're doing is we're increasing density along areas that can already support it. These are the places where our restaurants and shops are. These are the places where the amenities are. And also, if you concentrate population in these areas or along these corridors, we are going to be able to create a much more efficient and effective transit service in and out of our communities. That is my vision on how we can address this issue into the future, and an overarching philosophy that we can use for addressing growth in the future. Thank you very much.
Could I just get you to repeat the question for me?
See, we sent some of the questions to them, but not all of them. Okay, the two urban areas of South Delta were developed mostly as single-family neighborhoods surrounded by natural habitats and agricultural land reserve, farmland. How do you see Ladner and Tsawwassen accommodating growing and changing populations in the future?
I grew up in Ontario, and when I was a kid, we used to go down to the creek. There was two creeks we went to, and we used to swim there, and we would all get together, and it was in the woods, and it was just a great area. If you go there now, you'll find out that both those areas are developed with housing. It's still single-family housing, but there's a big hotel near one. But they're gone. So my grandchildren can never really go, if they were in Ontario, go back to those creeks. And that's, I feel a little bit wistful when I think about the fact that that can't happen. When I moved to Ladner and Tsawwassen, or moved to Tsawwassen, I'm just amazed, and I love the lifestyle of Tsawwassen. It's sort of like you go through the tunnel and all of a sudden you've gone through a time warp. You know, you really have gone into something that's just so wonderful. And is, you know, the busyness is okay there, but you know, I'm glad to come home and just go. So, but having said that, we have to be aware that with increasing populations, we have to have housing for those populations. And I agree totally with what you're saying. I was listening to what you're saying and making notes because they're great ideas, and I'll use them when I'm Minister of Housing. But really, really great ideas. But It has to be planned. It has to be taken care of, and we still want to preserve our lifestyle. And so that's what's really important. And again, I know I sound like a broken record, but the consultation and the planning and the work that has to come from that is very important. And so everybody can have the aspirations, whether they want to continue renting. And while I own a house now, I didn't buy a house till I was 40, and it was always my dream to own a house. Some other people are quite happy and happy not to have to cut the grass and look after a house. So everybody has different choices, and that's what we need to have. Mixed development. I still hope that there will be single-family homes. Last thought, I was in China last March, and that's amazing. There's no single houses there. They're all apartments, huge apartments everywhere, and that's how everybody lives. And I wouldn't want to see that for us. I hope we can have the mixed development and still preserve what we're like in Ladner and Tsawwassen.
Well, we have to do something to increase the supply of affordable accommodation, but we also, probably one of the best ways to do that is to deal on the demand side. Particularly put an end to, if we can, or at least minimize this rampant speculation on homes as investments. And that, of course, is what's driven the whole thing up. And so we need to have a bold and a more comprehensive kind of approach to real estate. I'll talk about that in a moment. But as it affects our community here, none of us want to see high rises here in both communities in Delta. And, or I assume that none of us do, many people don't. And so we're looking at more medium density. We have to densify somehow. And that medium density could be rental facilities, but also one of the ways to own a home that has been very successful across the country is co-ops. And I know there is a co-op now in East Ladner. I'm not sure what other co-ops are around. But cooperative housing it offers the ability to own a place and still be able to afford it much more easily. We also need protections for tenants and landlords for people renting, and we have to address the impact of absentee ownership. I went back to my old neighborhood in Ladner to do some canvassing because I thought, well, they know me there. And it should be a cinch. And as I was walking around just our little street, we had a beautiful spot there, it seemed like half of the houses weren't lived in. You could just tell. And it wasn't that they just didn't answer the door. And so things are changing, and the houses aren't lived in because somebody is speculating there. So I'd love to tell you more about the Green Party policy, but obviously I've run out of time. But we have a very aggressive policy to stop speculation.
Okay, this has been mentioned, but I'm going to ask for your position. Recently published report from the University of British Columbia says the Site C dam on the Peace River is not needed, and that halting the project will save up to $2 billion for the province. What is your view on the Site C plan?
When I think of the Site C plan, it will probably, if the Liberals are elected, it'll be called the Christy Clark Dam. And the Massey Bridge. Those two projects alone are going to come in at around $9 billion. Do you realize that that's $3,000 for every man, woman, and child in British Columbia? Not just $3,000 per family, $3,000 for every man, woman, and child. Definitely we need to be planning for the future, but right now our party is calling for a stop of the dam, a reassessment of the dam. Some of the things that you may not be aware of, but when the dam's built, first of all, they're telling us that we won't need the electricity, but we can sell the electricity off, which costs us 23 cents a kilowatt to produce, and we're going to sell it to the United States and Washington for 10 cents a kilowatt. That's a great business plan. So when it's built and ready to go, it's going to cost us $1 billion a year to operate. So, at this point, maybe it was a good idea at the time. I'm not saying it was, but maybe it was. But it's not now. And, the thoughts of throwing good money after bad just doesn't make sense. So basically our party is saying we have to stop, we have to take a real reassessment, and we have to look at the other pieces. A lot of people are upset because of the jobs that we lost if we stop it. But we have to put our money into making jobs that are going to be meaningful jobs, jobs that are going to be good for the environment. The other thing that I found out from another friend is that in terms of, we think hydroelectricity is really environmentally good. The methane that's going to be created by the dead plants that are killed when this is flooded is going to have a huge effect on our atmosphere. And so the actual pollution that comes from hydroelectricity when you flood huge areas, actually, I don't think it even breaks even. So definitely our stand is that we are against the Site C dam, at the very least, at stopping it and putting a pause on it right now.
The way I calculated, if we can save $2 billion on the Site C dam and save maybe, let's say, $3 billion on not building the bridge, and that's very conservative, as you know, because there are always high cost overruns. So let's assume, let's be conservative for a moment and assume it's $5.5 billion. No, we don't want to be conservative or liberal or another party, but anyway. So whatever it is, let's say it's $5 or $6 billion, okay? I mean, I have trouble getting my head around $1 billion, so I have to tell myself that's 1,000 million, Larry. Because it's a heck of a lot of money. Anyway, with the $5 or $6 billion, that is far more than the Green Party, who has the most expensive budget of any of the three parties, because we budgeted out 4 years, the full term, instead of 3 years, for one thing. But anyway, the full budget for healthcare and education, as I said, we're going to spend a lot of it on education, and housing and everything else is budgeted out at $4.6 billion. So all you have to do is, stop those two projects or find alternatives to the bridge that make a lot more sense and easily paid for. So when people say, wow, you guys are just going to spend the money and you're going to tax us, that's the old neoliberal thinking again, right? Because the liberals aren't really liberal, they're neoliberal. And the thinking is small government, reduce taxes, don't spend too much because everybody's going to be taxed more. And a lot of those assumptions, the same around GDP, number of jobs as opposed to the quality of jobs. As you know, many of the jobs that were created are temporary, they're precarious, they're very low wage. But we're looking at all the wrong measures, it seems, which allows the Liberals to convince people that they're doing the right thing and we don't want to change course now. We don't want to jeopardize our master plan. Well, they don't really have a plan at all, as you know, because they do something different from what they proposed in the first place. Thank you.
Well, according to all estimates, the Site C dam is very, very quickly losing all of its justifications as more and more and more information comes out about it. And this is a startling trend with a lot of the information that the BC Liberals have been putting out in the first place. As time goes on, as more information comes out, as we get farther down to completion on these projects, you find out how much the cost overruns are going to be. What the actual cost and debt accrued by the province is going to be for these projects, and what the actual impacts are going to be. Like my colleague mentioned, the methane flooding of that, of the area has been drastically understated. And I have an article here today, just in the the Metro, I believe, 24, stating that our provincial methane emission estimates have been grossly underestimated. I also have, regarding Site C, CBC article here that says, analysis says the project is no longer going to benefit the provincial economy as once expected. Those are all very worrisome statements. But even more so, I was just talking with Vicky earlier today, and she was telling me about her trip up into the area. And she said of about 1,200 to 2,000 jobs that were currently active on the project, the locals were saying that only about 600 or around that number were going to local BC workers. Even now, those jobs are going out across Canada, and if you remember the memorandum of understanding that the provincial government signed with China, they are also probably being put out to tender for foreign workers to come into our province and take the jobs that rightfully should go to the people of British Columbia. Thank you very much.
Just while we're waiting, I'm just going to add that Andrew Weaver has estimated that every job created by Site C Dam will cost taxpayers $440,000 a year per job because of the discounts that are given to the customers and so on.
You just got 30 seconds taken off your next
It was worth it.
Thank you, I'm only kidding, but don't make it a habit. Oh dear. Okay, the next question. Low impact housing and commercial development on the river is part of our urban landscape. With the Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations taking over management of water lot leases, there are reports that new leases could be just for a 10-year duration. There are concerns this will negatively impact current and future shoreline uses. Do you support environmentally friendly waterfront development, and if so, how should it be managed?
Okay, I'm going to answer that in two parts. One is, of course, we support environmentally friendly, sustainable development along the water because it's the Green Party, right? So you would expect that from us, and that's the nice thing about our party is that we don't promise one thing and do another. You know what you're going to get. So you may not like what we're offering, but that's what we're going to do if elected. And it's looking pretty good in some places. The second part of the way I'm going to answer that question is that, yes, it doesn't seem right that the water lot leases are so short because nobody can make a commitment, and it seems unjust to me. At the same time, I really don't know enough about this situation to express an informed opinion. So I'm going to sit down now, and there's my 30 seconds. Okay,
Okay, you read it.
So when it comes to water lot leases, this is something that I got a great education when I went to the Floating Home Association's AGM last week there. And their major concern was the long-term impacts of those 10-year leases. Now that is a very, very short amount of time. And that's supposing that that is as low as they go. I've heard sometimes they get down as low as 30-day leases on these places. Now these are people's homes. These are people's marinas where they hold their pleasure craft so that they can enjoy our rivers. And these are the livelihoods of people who use the river to generate their income. Our fishermen, our tourist industry, if we can get it really, really good and running. But to say that, as my colleague pointed out, that I support environmentally friendly, low-impact housing on the river, absolutely. But 10-year leases is not long enough to put a real investment into the infrastructure, into your home, into your marina. You need a longer period than that. And the Floating Home Association, they aren't asking for something ludicrous. They aren't asking for 1,000 years or 50 years. They're asking for 30-year leases as an initial step. Now, those 30 years will be enough to give them time to plan, to make statements and invest in the future of their properties and in their product. So I think that is definitely something that we need to look at as a provincial government and as your independent MLA, whichever party is able to support that, wherever that good idea can come from, I will be able to support it. Thank you very much.
The question that I ask when I'm asked the question or the way I answer when I'm asked a question that I quote, don't know the total answers for, my first response is tell me more. The second thing that I always ask, and whether I'm dealing with students at school or whether I'm dealing with adults or anything, is what's fair? What is fair? That should be our goal, to make sure whatever we do is fair. the problem with government is that when you take from one person and you give to another person, someone wins and someone loses. And that's a fact of life, and it's also a fact of government. So my question in this particular case is what's fair? And obviously the 30-year lease makes sense. I'm not proposing any party stand, but I do have a question. Why is it that leases on traditional First Nations lands are traditionally 99 years? So why would a lease in this situation be less? And there's probably good answers for it. I'm not saying I'm just questioning why. So even 30 years in some ways may not be fair, but definitely we want to make sure that, as both my colleagues have said, that it's going to be sustainable, it's going to be environmentally friendly, and even environmentally reproductive. But still that we can do that. So the question has to come with all these issues, what's fair? I think what's unfair is the way that the control of these lands were just dumped on another agency, and really they weren't even given a chance to an agency that really wasn't looking out for the best of of what was going on. So that's, again, something that happens when the Liberals are in control and they do things that are unfair.
I'd like to thank all of you that submitted a question, and I'm going to try to compound a couple of them together. So if you hear your question being compounded into another one, it's because it's around the same issue. So a number of questions have been put forward with respect to healthcare in British Columbia, and I'm going to try to consolidate these. What is your party going to do for mentally ill and addicted people living on the streets or in rat-infested hotels or rooming houses? It says in Vancouver and all over the province. That's number one. And what is your view of the Liberals' new process of allowing night stays at private clinics, and they're contemplating a private system that would run past the public system?
Can you just repeat that second half of the question, please? Well, the first one was, what are we going to do about healthcare generally?
Generally, with mentally ill and addicted?
Mental health, yes.
Yes. Okay.
But what was the last part about private clinics?
Overnight stays at private clinics and the private healthcare initiative.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all very much for this question. It is definitely one that's very, very close to me. I worked very hard on the Fraser Delta Hospital campaign to restore surgical services that were lost at Delta Hospital when the BC Liberal government tried to shut it down in the early 2000s. We were quite successful, and we see a great increase in Delta Hospital to today. So first of all, mental health. I think what we really have to do in mental health is to make sure that we have a full suite of services and not just address mental health as a drop. Mental health goes much farther than just what we're able to do once someone has been identified in the system as someone with mental health. But we need to make sure that people have support systems in place so that they're able to find someone to go to before they get too far down the road, where they're still able to make a rebound and a great recovery and have that addressed in the community that they live. But most importantly, I think this question comes down to the Liberal plan. Well, quite frankly, it says right here, from the BC Health Coalition, that the BC Liberals need to be upfront about private healthcare plans. And quite frankly, I cannot abide, and I will not sit by while our healthcare system gets divided into public and private healthcare. First of all, the statement by Minister Terry Lake that he's going to allow overnight stays at private clinics essentially sanctions private hospitals at this point. It's a slippery word, and that's where it's going. When it comes to private healthcare, we cannot have a private and public system run efficiently or well in this province. Private healthcare, as they say that you're taking somebody out of the queue for public healthcare and putting them into private healthcare. But we're 700 doctors, surgeons, short in BC in our healthcare system already, which means that every doctor that they take out of our public healthcare system to the private healthcare system is a doctor that is not able to serve our public healthcare system. Now, they say it's for people who are able to afford it. I say everyone can afford it right now under a single payer system, and that's the way we need to keep it. Thank you very much.
A few years back in the 60s, those of you who were around then can remember what the NDP brought in. Medicare. Our universal health system that we all enjoy and are thankful for came in as an NDP initiative. Thank you.
Tommy Douglas.
Tommy Douglas, yes. The NDP has always had the interest of everybody in mind and wanting things to be universal and fair. So when we look at what the Liberals are doing, not only to answer your question, but also in the underfunding of our healthcare system, it's a crime. It's a shame that we're having our underfunding for our healthcare. Now, the question also had to do with mental illness. Again, as a counselor, it's an area I know a little bit about. One of the things we have to do comes back to education, which is another area that I'm about. We have to educate our population to understand that mental illness is not something that we should be ashamed of. It's not something that we sort of shy away from. We have to accept it, and we have to be making the resources available for people who suffer from mental illness to get compassionate treatment and be able to be dealt with the same way someone with a broken leg does. And in our society, it's something that we all have to work on, because it's a social thing, and this is why mental illness has such a negative connotation. So we really have to look at that, and we have to show value to people. That's the other thing that I think is very important. We have to show that we value people. I'm going to very quickly move on, though. First of all, with regard to the universal health care, you're absolutely right. When you take doctors and put them in the private system, it's taken away from the public system. And you know what? This is the insidious thing. A lot of times the private hospitals, the private doctors, private clinics will go to the public hospitals because the public hospital will sell them time, because they make money to make their budgets work, because they're underfunded. Most people don't understand that. It's just so insidious. All of our society is being infused by this money basis, insidious nature that is taking away from all our systems, but especially in healthcare. See that sign, brother?
Well, the Green Party takes a broad view, comprehensive approach to integrated healthcare. And, you know, everything is interconnected in some fashion. So you can't address mental health, for example, on its own. Mental health is connected to addictions, it's connected to homelessness, it's connected to low incomes because people don't have that sense of self-worth, and they're always worried about how they're going to survive, which would drive me crazy. Fortunately, I have been fortunate throughout my life financially, but it's very interesting. Now that I've said that, I have a chart here that was put together by the Canadian Medical Association and has been very recently, I think it was April 2017, and it was corroborated by one of my past clients, the World Health Organization, and it shows that the social determinants of health, and 50% of those are other things in your life, other than how well you're looking after health care, or what the wait times are, or your genetics, or your biology, which is only 15% according to these folks. And but 50% is your income, early childhood development, employment and working conditions, social safety net, safe and nutritious food, housing, and homelessness. So there's a few other things there. It's a very interesting chart. So if we try to hit some of our healthcare deficiencies head on, we're only going to get so far. We'll be going around the wheel. Whereas we have to have an integrated approach and a kind of a comprehensive strategy that takes all these other factors into consideration. And so what the Green Party is planning to do is set up a specific ministry for mental health and addictions, which I've already mentioned go together as well. Thank you.
And we noted that there was a number of questions around health, and there is another debate this Saturday at the Delta Hospital, and I would urge... Sorry, Tsawwassen United Church. So you have to have a candidate tell me where all these debates are happening. It's great. We've had a lot this year, and it's really wonderful to see so many people coming out. But it is on Saturday, and I would urge any of the questions that you have with respect to healthcare and physician care. Pardon? 2 o'clock. Thank you. Anyway, this is good. It's called collective working together. All right. So, next question. In 2005, an all-party committee of the legislature recommended salmon farms be moved off the ocean and land-based, but nothing has been done to enact legislation to date. Will the candidates be prepared to work towards removing open net salmon farms off of BC coastal waters?
An area I don't know a lot about, but my understanding is that the reason why they want to get the salmon farms off the coastal waters is because of the risk of infecting the natural population. So basically, with regard to the joint understanding, it just, again, seems reasonable and fair that we work to see that happening. But I must confess, I'm not well up on that topic. It just seems really reasonable that we look at doing that, especially as you say, it was already decided by the joint committee. Why hasn't it been done? Well, then I can go into my anti-liberal thing. Because they don't do things they don't want to do. And they don't do things that doesn't have a monetary value to them. Anyway, sorry.
Can I use up Bruce's spare time? Because I know a lot about this issue. I had no idea it was going to be asked, but quite a few years back, it might have been around 2005, the BC Salmon Farmers Association was my client. And I also had another client who was developing, it was called Future Sea Farms. They were developing land-based salmon farming. And the challenge there was to keep the fish happy because they had to keep swimming around. Anyway, I don't want to go off on that tangent. But, you know, Alexandra Morton has been doing some tremendous work in keeping this open. And I want to acknowledge that. But I wasn't working... I have cooperated with her, but I was not actually working with her at the time. At that time, I was, as I say, the Salmon Farmers Association was my client, and I was trying to do my usual facilitation where I try to reach consensus with people, and they come to agreement on how they're going to work together, etc. After having done a consensus thing where they had a huge conflict and they couldn't resolve it, and I brought them to resolution in full consensus, they were, I guess, impressed by that, and so they asked me to help them find consensus amongst salmon farm operators on a code of ethics, their first code of ethics that they were going to have for salmon farming. And so they talked about all kinds of aspects of not just keeping the fish happy, but, you know, the use of chemicals with the fish and antibiotics, and disposing of the dead fish safely, and all kinds of great stuff. And we did. We reached full consensus. I think there were about 10 or 15. Some were Norwegian companies and so on. But we actually ended up with this fabulous document that was a draft. Well, it wasn't even a draft. Like, it was an almost ready code of ethics. And then the executive director of the BC Salmon Farmers Association changed to a new person, and that was the end of it. That's my story. I'm definitely, excuse me.
I think you did.
Definitely against open net farming, absolutely. Lice and all that, sea lice, and yeah. Thank you.
This is another one of those issues for the environment, for our community that I have been involved in since I was about 18 years old. And I'm actually pretty sure that's where I met Bob the first time, at one of these filmings for the salmon, or the showings of the salmon films. And I gotta say, like, fishing is actually just part of my family's history. My grandfather, when he was back in Malaysia, he owned fishing boats in a river up to Thailand from Malaysia. And when he came over here and he had Mr. Mike's, he also had a couple of fishing boats here as well. So I've been very communicative with the community. You know, I'm happy to see that John Stevens is here, another local fisherman. And absolutely, unequivocally, we need to get these open net fish farms out of our salmon-bearing rivers, out of the path of native Pacific salmon, and onto dry land. Like, that's unequivocally, it's just something that we have to do. As my colleague mentioned, there are issues with sea lice, contamination, antibiotics, and they plunk these gigantic things right in the middle of the migratory path of these very young salmon, which means they get it once as they're going out, as young salmon barely able to survive, and then once going back to their traditional spawning grounds. So they get hit twice on these paths as they go through their life cycle. So yes, absolutely. If you need someone to go to bat for the safety of our salmon supplies, for this community and for this province, I, as your independent MLA, will absolutely do so. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
I would think you guys organize yourselves.
I actually don't like to be first. Okay. Go ahead.
Last question. I'm sure everybody's ready to... But before we go to the last question, I'm going to ask all of you something. Every one of you that are going to vote, stand up. And if you're sitting, it means that you're not physically capable of standing up, because otherwise we'll hunt you down and take you to the polls. Elections are what our grandfathers and fathers fought for in world wars, what we still fight for today, and if we don't like what we have, or we want something different, or we want the same, we have an obligation to exercise our democratic rights. So thank you all for saying that you're going to go vote. And I think this is an appropriate question, as a final question. Will your main loyalty be to your party or to your constituents?
Okay, easy one. Obviously, I represent a party, but it's a party of a different sort from the other two parties. In that the Green Party here in BC Green Party, as well as the Green Party of Canada, both have assured their representatives that they are able to fully represent the constituents, and there will never be a party whip. We will never be compelled to vote as a bloc, and so that's one of the things that differentiates us from the other parties. And another differentiator, which guarantees me that right, is the fact that the Green Party is a global movement. Okay, it's not just a provincial political party with no accountability outside the province. We have to follow a set of principles, 6 principles that are shared by Green parties around the world. There are over 400 elected representatives in parliaments around the world that belong to various Green parties. Many of them in Europe, as you know, Germany and the Netherlands, quite a few in Africa, and lots of women there actually got elected, and which I think is wonderful because, of course, you're a more evolved race. Also, I work with some in Australia, New Zealand, and that kind of thing on human rights issues in Southeast Asia. So the Green Party is doing wonderful things around the world, and these 6 principles, one of them is proportional representation, which is so important. We have to stop this strategic voting nonsense. one's, of course, around the environment and sustainability, and you notice I haven't talked too much about that today because it's wonderful. We're at a point where the other parties are all talking about it as well. And I know anyway, the Green Party is a wonderful thing, but I have a few more minutes, right?
No, you have a second.
1 second. Anyway, don't believe Christy Clark with the thermal coal is just a bargaining chip, and I'm concerned that South Delta is going to be used as a sacrificial pawn in the negotiations. Thank you.
I definitely worry about that too. I mean, that's the whole reason that Fraser Dock expansion is being proposed. Like that, no, absolutely. Let's keep U.S. thermal coal out of this community. And I'm really happy to hear my colleague say that his party has allowed him to do what an independent does by its very nature. As an independent representative and as your next independent MLA, there is no question of where my loyalty lies, because I have no other loyalty than to the people of South Delta, than to the land of this community, and to the amazing environment that we have inherited. Now, in the last 4 years, there have only been 2 votes cast by MLAs in the major parties against their party platform, which means that every single other vote in the last 4 years were cast 100% NDP for NDP and 100% BC Liberal for BC Liberal. And that is something that I cannot abide by, because that is not representation for you, for this community. That is representation for the party platform first. And they aren't asking what is best for South Delta, the way that I will in Victoria. They are asking what is best for the party platform so that we can get elected 4 years from now. And we will not survive as a society thinking in 4-year terms. No. I'm not running for the next 4 years, I'm running for the next 40. And that's something I've said over and again through this election and the previous municipal election. But it is true. So I'm born and raised here, and I hope to God that I get the chance to die here, because it is my home and it is an amazing, amazing community. And you know where my loyalty lies. It is to South Delta first, South Delta last, and South Delta for every step in between. Thank you very much.
Well, here's where I differ. I'm a Canadian first, and I'm a British Columbian, and I'm a South Deltan. If you want to know if I'm going to vote party line, well, just my wife sitting down there. You can ask her. I've been in a lot of organizations and a lot of places. Gotten in a lot of trouble because I've stood up for what I believe is right. Would I vote for things that would be uniquely favorable to South Delta at the detriment of the rest of the province? I absolutely would not, and I can promise you I wouldn't do that. I would certainly be listening, and I would certainly hear, but I believe in everything here in South Delta. I believe in the environment, but I believe it's a little naive to say, well, I only care about my community, and I don't care about the greater community. There are people in Vancouver who are on drugs. There are people who are hungry. There are students who are not being taken care of, and for me to say, I just care about South Delta, I'm sorry, I wouldn't do that, and I'm proud to say that I wouldn't do that. I'm a British Columbian, and I believe I wouldn't vote against things that would harm South Delta, but I believe that we all have to think about our greater community. We can't just think about ourselves, and that's just the way I feel. In terms of representing South Delta, my policy, and this is the way I've always lived, is fairness and standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves, and working. And I spent my whole life doing that in the Salvation Army, in the school system. I fight for people who need to be fought for. And if there's one person in South Delta that needs to be stood up for, I will stand up for them and I will fight for them and make sure that they get a fair treatment. But I'm not going to say you're going to get a special favor because you're South Delta if it's not beneficial to the whole greater community. And British Columbia is still where we are, and Canadians are still where we are. So I'm sorry, the idea of just standing up for our community, to me, and maybe you're not going to vote for me, if you're going to vote independent, you wouldn't anyway, just seems selfish. I think you have to vote for the greater good of the whole community, and we are British Columbians as well as South Deltans. And if we're going to just vote for ourselves, then I think that reflects very poorly on us.
now going to give you, all of you, the opportunity to have 2 minutes to ask why we should support each and every one of you, or each one of you separately, or one of you. That's what elections are all about. So I give you 2 minutes each, and if you go 10 seconds over, it's forgiven.
I'm just going to assume that we're going to do this in reverse order? Yes. Well, first of all, let me again thank the Council of Canadians and the Delta Residents Association, along with Ms. Spratt, who for putting this on. But most importantly, I want to thank each and every one of you here, because quite frankly, we have to be here. But you guys are the ones taking some time out of your evening to come and hear us. Actually, obviously not, right? So, but you guys are the ones who are taking times out of your week to come here and be engaged in the single greatest process that humanity has ever produced. It is democracy. It is freedom of speech that has allowed us to progress beyond our baser instincts. And yes, we need to consider British Columbia as a whole. But isn't what is good for South Delta also going to be what is good for British Columbia? I think so. And my colleague might speak of the fact that he is going to stand up to the party and be the only one in I don't know how many elections to directly oppose the party platform and not be rejected from caucus wholesale. But history has shown us that that is just not the case. Because I bet every single one of those party candidates, when they were running, said the exact same thing, that they are going to be the ones to stand up for their community, and they're going to be the ones who are going to be a champion against the party. But if you have to go against the party, why are you in the party in the first place? Isn't that a fair question? I say it again. I said it once and I'll say it again. I love this community, and my first and only responsibility are to its citizens here in South Delta. When you vote for me as your next independent MLA, you can know that you can come at any time and ask what is going on, and I will give you the facts. You can come up to me with a concern, with an issue, and know that I will deal with you with the same candor, integrity, and honesty that I do, well, everything that I can. I'm just here as a young man, part of this community, trying to inspire other people to get involved in this process, because this is how we make Canada better, this is how we make British Columbia better, and I know for certain, this is how we are going to make South Delta better and keep it independent. Thank you very much.
I actually don't have anything prepared for a closing, and so I'm making this up as I go. But the first thing that comes to mind is that South Delta is in a quite different situation from other ridings. And when we hear about strategic voting and hear about who has the great best chance in other ridings and those kinds of the guesswork that goes on, the polls and so on, it doesn't really apply here. This is a very unique situation. And I wasn't sure until the last minute that I would be running in this election, representing the Green Party. But it was a decision that was made by Andrew Weaver, and so I agreed to do it for them. And I'm glad to do it. It's a wonderful place to represent here, and it has been my home for as long as I can remember. And so here I am, not knowing what to say. How's that for kind of stretching it out? Now I need less time. But anyway, thank you. I think I'm just going to conclude by thanking you folks for putting this on today and for hosting it, both the Delta Residents Association and the Council of Canadians Local Chapter. And I am always impressed by the determination of volunteers here in South Delta around defending the hospital, certainly Fraser Voices, and so many groups of people and individuals who have been active and have not settled for the status quo. And so I thank you all for taking action and for being here tonight. Oh, I also want to thank Susan for talking about how important it is for us all to vote. It really is. Thank you.
To be very honest with you, Nick said he's around for the next 40 years. When elected, I'm here for 4, look at me, 4 years. After that, we'll talk. We'll see. But basically the commitment is that in 4 years, hopefully, which we all agree on, we can do something about this government that's made a mess of this province. I think everybody here, maybe some of your supporters, maybe not, but most of us here don't want the Liberals to get back in. Most of us here want the Liberals to go. I was talking to one of Nick's supporters after the last debate, and I said to her, but what if by you voting an independent in South Delta, it tips the scales to the point that the Liberals actually get back in? You know what she said to me? I can live with that. That was her answer. I can't. I can't live with another 4 years of the Liberals. And so I think we all have to agree. And to be honest with you, I really work hard to try and understand independent. I know independence really has a purpose in putting a protest vote in. But in the long run, when you're independent, I just don't get it. I guess the only way. I guess I can. Sorry.
Worked for Vicky for 8 years.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. And I'm not going to touch that line, but anyway, no, you got to give me a few seconds. You know, that's only fair. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Here's how I understand it. I really have trouble with the whole concept. As I say, I understand the history of independence throughout. But okay, here's the scene for you. You've got a hockey game. You've got the Canucks on one side. You've got the Oilers on the other side. And as they're getting ready to play, the door opens and out flies a guy in white. And he scores for the Oilers sometimes, and he scores for the Canucks sometimes. And then the rest of the time, he just complains about how badly the other two teams are playing. That's how I understand it. Anyway, if you want to get rid of Christy Clark, you have to vote for the NDP to help get rid of her. Thank you.
So before everybody gets up to go, please, we're almost finished. I would like you all to give a very warm welcome and listen to Christina Shalong from the Delta Residents Association, who is a co-sponsor for tonight with the Council of Canadians. Christina.
Thank you. My name is Christina Shong, and I would like to thank everybody today for taking time to come out and to hear our candidates speak. We also would like to thank all the many volunteers who helped make this event possible tonight. Before we conclude the program, I just want to tell everybody a little bit about who we are at Delta Residents Association. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan group of local residents whose goal is to, 1, inform people about issues important to Delta residents. 2, encourage residents to participate in the democratic process. And 3, bring all 3 Delta communities together. Hosting this event has been funded by memberships and donations. If you would like to support our group, please consider buying a membership with Delta Residents Association or making a donation at the front sign-in table. We also have a free monthly newsletter that we send. All you need to do is to give us your email at the front table. Today, many questions were submitted by this Delta community, about 15, that were not asked in this evening's presentation. And after I finish speaking, I would like to talk to our 3 guests to talk to them about, I will type them all up and email them to you tomorrow morning. And then I would like to also talk to you about when I can reasonably expect these answers to come back so that they can be posted in our next newsletter in May. And posted on our website as well. So if you would like to receive a copy of this free newsletter by email, you need to sign the back table, the email list for Delta Residents Association, and then we can get that information to you.
Will that be before or after the election?
It will be before the election. Yes, absolutely. So everyone is welcome to stay longer and mingle and have coffee before the event closes at noon. Oh, before the event closes at 9:30. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you, everyone. And if you've got a kid that's over 18, drag them. Get them to the polls.